We're still missing 3 or 4 people based on the actual number of registrants, so we'll wait a couple more minutes. All right, well, we've sort of stabilized, so let's get started. Maybe a few more people will trickle in if they want or if they're coming. So welcome, everybody. My name is Adrian Del Maestro. I'm a professor here in the physics department and also in ECS. I'm pretty brand new. I started in August. I was a professor at the University of Vermont for a while, and before coming here, definitely the University of Tennessee is an exciting place to be. So I'm happy to be here, and hopefully you guys are happy to be in this class. And one of the impetus for coming here was the new cluster on campus around quantum materials for future technologies, and part of that is connected to you leveraging advanced algorithms to do physics, essentially. And so this course kind of grew out of that idea. There's been other machine learning courses on campus, and in fact, some people said that they've even taken those courses before on campus based on that pre-class survey. So this one is going to be a little bit different, hopefully. Hopefully it's not boring if you've already taken those classes or a class before. We're really going to focus on applications, basically, of neural networks, deep neural networks, to some interesting physics problems, hopefully. And because there isn't really much, there wasn't many prerequisites for this class, and people could be coming from various areas, I'm going to assume not a lot of domain knowledge. We'll tend to focus in the area of statistical mechanics and quantum statistical mechanics, maybe, which is my area of interest and expertise. But I won't assume that you know anything about that. So, for example, one of the systems that we'll use, which is kind of it's a really beautiful system, which is the 2D Ising model, basically a model of ferromagnetism, where there's an exact solution, so we can really test things. We'll go through lots of detail. So there'll be some physics components where we learn about the types of models that we're going to study. But again, for background, if you know some basic linear algebra, then everything should be fine. On the programming side, we're going to use Python predominantly in this class, but if you really wanted to use something else, I would be okay with that as well for assignments and such. But Python, I think, provides it's probably the easiest to use and very easy to set up a good environment to be able to do the types of things that we're going to do. And one thing that we're kind of trying out a little bit, which I think is going to be really, really cool, is we're actually going to use what was ACF, but is now Isaac in this class. So we're going to use the supercomputer basically in class, which I think is going to be really fun. That essentially means that, instead of being limited by whatever laptops we have, we'll be able to actually run code right on the supercomputer through the Open On Demand, which is a web-based interface where we can spin up a Jupyter notebook. So there's lots of different technologies that we'll have to learn. I'll come back to this a little bit later, but my kind of vision for the course is we have 2 lectures per week. The first one, like this one, for example, today, or one of the 2 per week, will be some theory. We'll, maybe do some derivations, try to understand some larger picture concepts. And excuse me, then the other one will be very much hands-on. So we'll break into breakout rooms. I'll make those kind of random coding groups. And then within those groups, you can work together on real time from code. And that, at the start of every lecture, we'll have some framework, some basic notebook that we can all pull down and we can start typing code in. And, for stuff like this, you basically can't learn it unless you're doing it. So you can read textbooks, which, for people that have actually tried to read a textbook on machine learning, they're all written by people from CS usually, or that have background in probability theory. It's not necessarily the way that I think about things. And so for me, I kind of like to just, get in there and start hacking away and learn how the algorithms work. And so that's very much going to be the framework that the approach that I'll take. I'll videotape the lectures are videoed. So if you missed that first, the one lecture of the week, the kind of theory lecture of the week, then you can definitely watch that outside of class, asynchronously if you want. The other one will be a little bit more difficult. Although I guess, if you weren't able to make it, you could still watch that video, which might just be me as I'm moving between the breakout rooms, I guess. And you'll have access to the notebook that we use and can try to do that outside of class time. So I'm pretty flexible with those sort of things, and you can let me know. And at the end of this time today, we'll just go over the syllabus quickly, and we can talk about some of the functional things of the course. But I thought it might be fun just to get started by jumping ahead, and then we'll come back. So let's talk about machine learning and some of the ways that it's useful and exciting in physics, and then we'll come back to some of the details about how we're actually going to run stuff. So let me share my screen here. And the other thing is, please feel free to raise your hand virtually or put a question in the chat. Although if I'm in the midst of something and thinking and whatever, I may not see it right away. So also feel free to unmute yourself and just holler at me, and then I'll stop. And you can, please stop me anytime. This is pretty informal. This is an upper level class, right? It's 494, 594, which is like special topics, undergrad, graduate, very nebulous. I think the difference between the undergraduates and the graduate students will be potentially maybe an extra question on the assignments, that it's a little bit more challenging, although those could be done for bonus if you want as an undergraduate enrollee. And then maybe a more advanced piece of the final project, which will make up the large part of the grade, which we'll get started on, let's say, after midterm. And one of the things that I always strongly encourage, we can talk about this more when we talk more about the final project, just to get you thinking now, I think it's worth like 40 or 50% of the final grade, is I strongly encourage you to double dip. So if you are doing research right now, if you're active in a group, and there's some way to tie the final project in this class to whatever research you're doing, then absolutely you should do that. That is beneficial for your interest in the project and also in whatever research group you're working in. Those turn out to be the most exciting and fun types of projects. The hardest thing usually is coming up with something of a good scope, because people tend to want to do very elaborate things. And so we always have to kind of ratchet back the scope, but I have some experience doing that. Okay.
One question. So will we have a list or something of possible projects that we could do?
Yeah, so I'll make a list, and we can also just talk about it. I mean, if you have an idea, definitely come to me and I'll make a list of some. All right, and it looks like it shared the wrong screen, right?
We're seeing the presentation.
Oh, you are? Okay, good. Okay, good. It always randomly selects one of my monitors to share regardless. All right, so as I said, please holler at me or send a chat if you have questions. Okay, so this is the first time that this class has been taught here. It's the first time that I've taught it here and kind of making it as we go. So, if there's things that you're really interested in covering that you don't think we're spending enough time on, or if there are pragmatic things about how we're running the course that you think could be different, by all means, let me know. I'm always happy to consider different modalities, how we're going to do things. And this is a picture from the poster that I made. It's basically the use of a recurrent neural network. So we'll learn more about those. Essentially, a neural network that can analyze time series. So when the previous and next links in some chain are highly correlated with each other. And so this is basically where I started with a few particles, just interacting via some simple interactions on a chain, let's say, and then I tried to predict what future iterations of that time series would be, and could compare against the exact in this case, because I know how to integrate Newton's equations of motions. So you can do lots of really cool stuff, and we'll learn more about that. I really like this quote by Domingos. This is a nice little thought piece, a few useful things to know about machine learning from a number of years ago. I'll just read it out. Programming, like all engineering, is lots of work. You have to build everything from scratch. So I think that's true in many cases about physics as well as engineering. Learning is more like farming, which lets nature do most of the work. Farmers combine seeds with nutrients to grow crops. Learners combine knowledge with data to grow programs. So, for us, data is going to be the most important thing. Without good data, luckily in physics, we often have lots of data sources, and we're going to be able to utilize that to grow some good programs. So just as, a very broad thing, AI, artificial intelligence, the goal is ultimately to build smart machines, right? And there we want them to be able to perform tasks that might typically require human intelligence. Over the last long time, but sped up recently because of advances in computing infrastructure, there's really this global and interdisciplinary effort. All these things, the combined advances in machine learning and deep learning, which is some subset of machine learning approaches that we'll focus on in this course, are really driving fundamental change everywhere. So we're seeing that constantly across science and technology. And this hierarchy here is kind of a thing that bears adding some further discussion on. There, you see sometimes people write things like AI/ML, artificial intelligence/machine learning, and people in the field specifically tend to get a little bit prickly about that, maybe rightly so. There's lots of old ideas in these, and there's really this kind of hierarchy. And so just to make that hierarchy clear, so as I said, AI, artificial intelligence, basically we want computers that can mimic intelligent behavior. As a subset of that, there's machine learning, which is basically running some type of program that allows a computer to learn something. And the point there is we don't give it an explicit set of rules. So normally, if you think about how you write programs, it's a bunch of if, then, else statements. Right? We have to program in every eventuality, but the goal of machine learning is to essentially not have to do that, to not have to, if there are a finite number of potential cases that you expect to happen, then this is absolutely not the right approach. Then you should put everything in, write it as some series of nested Boolean functions and write a normal computer code to deal with those eventualities. And that's what we normally do in physics if we're, let's say, running a simulation, making a simulation of a physical system, for example, molecular dynamics. Molecular dynamics is just a way to solve Newton's equations for a system of particles on a computer, a large number of particles, and then observe what happens. Well, there we know all possibilities. The only possibilities are basically that we have particles at some distance apart from each other, and they feel a force related to the potential that's acting on them, which for the case of neutral atoms would be the van der Waals potential, let's say. So that is not necessarily a case where we, to evolve that system, we would not want to use something like machine learning. And there are many, 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 there's a zoo of different classifiers and different ways of doing machine learning. We'll touch on a few in this course, but there are other courses here in the computer science department that go through all of these and the theory of all of these. Because of the existence of those courses and what people have found successful in physics, we're going to focus basically on neural networks, which is one particular type of machine learning approaches. You probably heard, the standard ones that we talked about are linear regression and logistic regression. There's, decision trees and all kinds of stuff, random forests. There's as many machine learning approaches as you could imagine, but we're really going to focus on just neural networks. And in particular, even a subset of that are deep neural networks. So I've drawn a picture here of the types of architectures that we're going to be using predominantly in this class. We'll do some other things as well. And we'll learn all about these and how to train them and everything. There's a really useful tool, which I've given you the link here, NN-SVG. This basically allows you to create nice pictures, pretty pictures of any neural network. So you can put in how many layers and how many neurons and, is it convolutional, whatever it is, and it spits you out a nice scalable vector graphics. So I use it all the time. It's an open source project. Definitely useful if you're making slides, anything related to neural networks. So, the point of, we'll talk more about these for the rest of the course, right? This diagram right here, how to generate these things, how to train them, how to do things with them. That will be the focus of this entire course. But this structure, this hierarchical structure here, where we have some inputs flowing to some outputs, is really bio-inspired. And this is definitely not the class to learn about that, not my area of expertise at all. But this is a picture from over 100 years ago, from 1899, by Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who basically drew pictures of bird brains. So this is some cells, neural cells from a pigeon cerebellum. And you can really see that, here's these neural cells, and then they kind of branch out in ways that is evocative of this picture right here. And so the inspiration for this kind of deep neural network, and here, so what does deep mean here? Deep basically means that there's a bunch of layers. There's a bunch of things inside in the middle. So here, in this case, there's two. There could be many more, and we'll talk about that. And I could have, it could be wider, it could be deeper, but no matter what, we'll always have some input layer and some output layer. Okay, so that's basically, these various subsets of things. I always show these 4 videos because I think they're cool. They're of recent things. People have probably seen some of those. Actually, there's even a more recent, awesome Boston Dynamics picture of dancing robots that people have probably seen that's been going around. But some of the conventional non-physics examples that we see a lot are things like self-driving cars, where we can basically have automated driving, and you can see all these polygons here are getting generated. There's things like reinforcement learning, which only in the last couple of years have seen the dramatic increase in the ability of robots to do complicated tasks. So even a couple of years ago, there's this famous DARPA challenge where MIT brought out its vaulted best robot, and it just fell over right away. Now they can do things like jump and dance. One can use things like convolutional neural networks. If you saw the video down here, to map one type of image onto another, or motions. This is a way that you can get people to finally dance. And then this is a kind of a fun thing, reinforcement learning, that allows, just by teaching the rules of a game, you can learn how to do really well at that game. So just a few examples, and just how widespread, basically why as physicists we should be learning it regardless of whether or not it was useful for physics. It's projected by the end of this year, there'll be 1 billion AI-enabled video cameras are going to be monitoring people in cities around the globe. And so this brings up ideas about how we should be worried about how AI works, that it's not just a black box. And I think maybe this is more philosophical, but right now the approach to artificial intelligence and machine learning is kind of a black box. We have a bunch of parameters that we tune, and the idea is to make some kind of product. So how does it work the best? But that's not how we normally do things in physics, right? In physics, we try to make simple models that we can really understand. We try to learn the rules of the game and then use those rules to extrapolate how behavior is going to occur. So, for example, the fact that we know how to get to the moon, or how we can land a rover on Mars, provided that we don't make any screw ups between meters and feet, is because we know the rules of physics really well, right? Where we know for sure, essentially provably, that we're gonna, as long as we fire thrusters at this point, at this apogee, we can get there. But that's not really how modern machine learning applications work. And so one of the more interesting and big ideas is there a way to use ideas from physics, things like the renormalization group, for people that have heard of that before, how to really get into the idea of neural networks and try to understand how they work. Are there provable things about them, things that we can guarantee? So we're not quite there yet. Lots of money is being spent on this, not surprisingly. So it's expected that the market will reach 120 billion. That's up from only 1.5 billion. So there's lots of money being spent, which means that there's lots of possibilities for investment and cool stuff happening. This is just a Google Trends interest report on machine learning. So you can see that in the last 5 years or so, there's been this huge uptick. But I always like to show this part of this graph, which is that, yes, that's a big uptick, but if you compare that with Google Trends search for quantum, which has stayed more or less constant, although maybe there's a slight downward slope here, it's still not up there. So quantum is still better than machine learning. And actually now there's even quantum machine learning. So you can hybridize these two things together. And this is just a map of the state, and where the most searches on machine learning are. You can probably see where, we're in one of those places where people care about this kind of stuff. All right, so what about deep neural networks? So this is the thing that I said we're going to focus on predominantly in this course. We'll do a little of other things, but there's just not enough time in one semester to get into all the details of everything. And so it makes sense, as I said, to focus on the thing that is most useful for physicists. And I'm hoping, and I keep saying physicists, I really need a proxy for scientists when I say that, right? So these types of things are being used across different fields of science. You probably heard about the new network to basically solve or quasi-solve the protein folding problem. So there's wide applications, but we'll predominantly focus on physics because that's what I know about. All right, so these are a few applications beyond the videos that I just showed you, but I think they're useful to describe in light of how things work and what these were the applications that came first before the physics applications. And so how people that learned about this realized that you might be able to apply these types of things to science. And the thing that was really the game changer in the application, which was basically image recognition. And this is also the thing that has been a game changer in some areas of physics. So let's just talk about how that kind of thing might work and then build up from there. So if we want to think about how a neural network might recognize an image of something, in this case as a cat, it's useful to think about what our brain does. So what does our brain do? Well, we basically have some input. In this case, our eyes see this picture of this cat down here, and something goes on. And then the output is we have a cat, right? So our brain is just some appliance, software plus hardware, that allows us to convert inputs into outputs. And the thing that's so amazing about learning as opposed to something more programmatic is that presumably, even if you've never seen this picture of a cat before, maybe you have seen this picture of a cat before, because if you go on Wikipedia and you put in cat, this is the one that comes up. So it's a famous cat. But even if you haven't seen this picture of a cat before, you can recognize that this is a cat, right? So that's the kind of important thing, that I've never seen the cat before, but I can do it. So we want to replace our brains with software that can do this for us. We're going to use these deep neural networks. So I've just taken that picture before and rotated it. So I have some input layer and some output layer. So ultimately, what is this object? What is the deep neural network? So I have a collection of what we'll call neurons in analogy to the human brain. And all these neurons are really just numbers. You should think about these as just numbers, either real or complex numbers. So I have this collection of neurons. They have some ordering. In particular, I have this input layer here and some output layer here. We'll talk about what that means. I have all these numbers, and then these numbers are tied together. So this graph has edges, and there's connections between one layer at a time. And of course, this is a choice that we make, but we only allow in this particular structure connections between adjacent layers. So you could imagine like a fully connected graph where I connect the inputs to the outputs and all to all others. That would be like an all to all type topology. But here we restrict to this kind of sequential, which is going to be connected to why we call these feed-forward neural networks, where we only have connections between, let's say, this layer and this layer. So these are the input and output. We call these layers in the middle hidden layers. So each of those edges, or the connections, which could be from one of these neurons to many other, just have some number associated with those. So those numbers are the weights that are associated with these edges. And so this thing is really just a data structure, right? Just like you store a matrix on your computer, this is just a generalization of that, where we have these numbers, which are the local weights, and then the on-site biases, and then we have these weights on the edges, which are just numbers that talk about how strong the individual connections are. And here I've drawn them such that you can see that some might be strong and some might be very weak. And so then the whole process of learning is basically that this architecture is differentiable. That's not, that's why this works so well. That didn't have to be the case. What do I mean by differentiable? I mean, if I change something a little bit, so let's say I just make a little nudge to the weight on this particular network or this edge, or the bias on this particular neuron over here, then that means that something is going to change at the output layer, but only by a bit. So that's really, by differential, I mean that I make a small change here, it leads to a small change somewhere else. And so if I can guide those changes, if I can make those changes in a way that allows me to optimize something. So in this case, I'm going to send in a picture of a cat into this network, and I'm going to change these weights and biases, the numbers on the neurons and the connections in between, until the thing I want happens. So until it says cat, or in this case, I have two. So maybe it's a binary classifier: cat, not cat, right? Cat, everything else other than a cat. So if I showed a picture of a cat, then once I've trained up all the, this network, once I've made it learn, I have some set of numbers, then whenever I showed a cat, it's going to fire this neuron here that says cat and not this one. And if I showed a picture of a dog, well, this particular set of weights is going to fire this other neuron that says dog. And so that's it. That's the whole thing, is just a fancy data structure that has a lot of expressivity and we need some way, to learn how to nudge it in the right direction through this differentiability. And so a lot of what we'll do over the first couple of weeks is figure out how to actually do that, how to do that nudging towards the outcome that we want. And, just like our brains, this would not be a very useful thing if it had to have seen that particular cat before. That problem is solvable, but it would take infinite memory. If I showed it a picture of every cat ever, all possibilities of cats, then it would just look and do some fast search in its memory and say, aha, that's a cat, because I have this in a bin labeled cats. So that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're basically showing pictures of some different cats, training these weights, and then when I go back and show it this cat, it says, okay, that's a cat, right? So that's the difference, and that's basically how our brains work, which is why if it had never seen a cat that was gray before, hopefully it has enough expressivity to be able to recognize this gray thing as a cat. And that's the problem of why we need lots of data. These things are only as good as how much we've trained them. So any questions about that? I've been kind of going on without stop.
So you mentioned this diagram here. I mean, it's a rotation of the previous one you had. So the one in the middle, the network or whatever.
Yeah.
Can we go over that? It was just not immediately obvious how that rotation worked.
Oh, well, I've just taken the picture and just rotated it. There's nothing, I mean, whether it goes up or down, to connect to the one that we saw before.
Okay. Thank you.
There's some input and some output. And the ones in the middle are in the hidden layers. And we'll come back to all of this as well. But yeah. So in this case for the cats, right, what is this input layer? Well, basically what we would do in this particular case, and we'll learn exactly how to do this, is I've expressed this as a 1D set of numbers. So how could I encode this picture as a 1D set of numbers? Anyone have any ideas?
Just turn all the pixels into a vector.
Yeah, so I can just unzip this. I can flatten it, right? I can just take a zip that goes all the way through back and forth, and that would be one long vector. And then if it was a black and white image, that would be fine, because then I would only need a single float, right? A single floating point to designate every one of those. But if it's a color image, then we have, let's say, 3 channels, RGB. So I could just copy that 3 times. So I could have the red channels, the blue channels, and the green channels. And so that would be my input layer. And then the output layer in this case is just cat or not cat. It's just a binary number. Excellent. Okay, so delete this. That was not supposed to come until the next one. So when the real game changer was 2012, and this is Geoff Hinton, who people have probably heard about before, a reasonably famous person in the field. So in computer science, there's a famous thing called the ImageNet competition. I wonder if we need more competitions in physics to push the field ahead, like who can, I don't know, diagonalize the biggest Hamiltonian or do the most Monte Carlo steps or something like that. We all get together and have some big competition. But there's this famous one, ImageNet. It's basically 1 million training pictures classified by humans. So they all have labels associated with them. And they're in thousands of object classes. I encourage you to go look at it. If you ever want to see 726 pictures of crabs, you can go look at the crab class and you'll see all those pictures. And so the challenge here was basically to write some type of computer program that if you trained it on part of this network, part of this set of images, that it could automatically recognize what the thing was that was coming in. So if you show it a crab, it knows it's a crab. And so this is a plot from Wikipedia of the error rate in the competition as a function of year, going back to 2011. And sort of prior to that, error rates were around 30%. So computers could recognize 30% of the images successfully, but not more than that. And then in 2012, you can see this huge jump, which is, you know, like basically as big of a jump as Bob Beeman's long jump at the Olympics. They held that record for a long time. This was just a complete game changer in how things happen. So this is so-called AlexNet, which here's a link to the NIPS paper for that from that year. And so this jump down here basically got the error rate down to 15.3%, and it beat the runner-up by 11%. So that had kind of never been seen before, that there was a new algorithm that was so much better. And then you can see after that, it's just collapsed down to, you know, this is only goes to 2016. Microsoft beat AlexNet the next year with some complicated convolutional neural network. This thing just keeps going down. And actually now these neural networks are better than humans. So humans actually misclassify some of the pictures in here on average. And also the networks are so good that they know, you know, not only is it a horse, they can tell you specifically what type of horse it is, which is pretty amazing. And actually the big thing right here, which was related to the next slide, was that this AlexNet was actually trained on GPUs. So it was a combination of you know, old ideas. So ideas around supervised learning have been around for a long time, but the computational power finally caught up, that you could actually train these things in a way that would be useful. And again, you train them once, right? And then you have a set of weights and biases, the numbers that represent that data structure. And then that's it, that's your program. Just those numbers is the program. I mean, that's such a dramatic change from how we normally think about programs. It's worth repeating again. You know, normally we imagine we have some inputs and we operate on them with a bunch of logic, and then we get these outputs. But for a neural network, it's purely linear algebra. It's basically, I give it some inputs, I apply some functions to those inputs, and it just, you know, there's no logic going on in there. It's just a set of functions that get applied, and at the end, I have some answer. So it's a very drastically different type of thing. And so this is a plot, so it's a little bit faint. Hopefully you can see it. I'll post these slides on Canvas. That, you know, here's 2012, where's AlexNet right there. This is when GPUs really got into the business. And you can see there's quite the slope change, right? So this is even a log, this is a semi-log plot here. So, you know, we had some kind of old neural networks, old, I mean, 15, 20 years old, that's not that old. And then at this point, the point around AlexNet, bam, now we go up. There's even things that aren't on here, like GPT-3, all the latest stuff. AlphaGo Zero, people probably heard about that. This is, you know, the ability to beat all human players at Go. But in terms of the number of petaflops that are required to train these, now it's getting more and more expensive. So it's really, really expensive computationally to train these neural networks. So it's a combination of new hardware and new ideas in the field that allowed this, you know, this new epoch of machine learning, if you like. Any questions about that? Okay, so I'll just flash quickly through some non-physics applications, and then we can think about how these might apply to physics applications. And people have probably seen these before. So one cool thing, this is a number of years ago, but the other thing that, you know, one reason why it's fun to both be in and will hopefully be in, but teach a class like this is you'll see that the references I'm using are like 5 years old, right? If you're learning classical mechanics, I'm probably not citing the archive. Although maybe there's some recent advances in classical mechanics. And for those that maybe haven't seen the archive before, this is just a preprint server. Essentially, all these papers are published, but just to prevent you from having to actually be on the VPN, if you want to get these papers, I usually will just cite the archive identifier. If you just Google this thing, it'll take you to the archive and you can download the paper and read it if you want to. But again, these are published, and I'm not trying to shirk the names of all the amazing people that did this work. But this is probably the fastest way for you to be able to get access to this without having to log into the VPN or, you know, inserting it into your address bar or whatever. Okay, so one of the cool things that some of these can do is, given an image, they can actually produce natural language describing what's going on in the image. And that just keeps getting better and better. And you can imagine why this would be such a useful thing to have if you were a company like Amazon, where you can now just take a picture of a product and then you can auto-generate a description for it, right? So, you know, we're basically saving human labor here. And again, this is all supervised learning insofar as it's trained on knowing what's in the image and then also descriptions of images. And from that, the network can learn to produce these type of nice descriptions. I'll just go through a couple of these. Of course, ASR is a really big deal right now. I won't mention in particular, but like check out is it rev.ai? Rev.ai, I think, it's like now only 20 seconds or 20, what is it? It's $1, 20 cents a minute, I think, something like that, to do automatic transcription service. So, if we wanted to get a closed captioning on this lecture, I can just feed the recording and it will automatically spit out. So it's doing automatic speech recognition. And also this is things like all your digital assistants, Siri and whatnot. One thing that it's pretty cool and has implications for media that we consume is auto colorization of images. So you can basically imagine, this is a situation where it's easy to generate huge amounts of training data. You can take an image that's colorized, or that is in color. Then you can basically just strip all the color channels out of it to produce a grayscale image, and then see if you can reproduce this back, right? So this is the ground truth. And then you feed this in and try to train the network until it can produce the colorized image again. And so then you can imagine going back and colorizing old black and white photos where there is no color version, or auto colorizing video. So I think this is what was done actually in, people might have seen some of these things on Netflix, like World War II in color, or there's a Peter Jackson movie where they show pictures, video from World War I that's in color. In that case, they use this auto colorization. So think about what used to happen before that. Like in a movie, someone used to literally have to go one frame at a time and do colorization. Now it can be done automatically, which I think is pretty cool. And the network here really has to know something, right? It has to know or be able to recognize that in this case, this is water, and water is usually blue, right? But it also needs to know, well, this type of water is different than this type of water. This type of water should be lighter blue than this type of water. So there's really deep things going on inside these networks. Machine translation is a big thing. Someone picked that out as one of the coolest things that they'd seen in neural networks. I certainly use this all the time when I was on sabbatical in Germany for words that I didn't know. You can point your phone at a menu and bam, it shows you the English translation. That's a pretty amazing thing. One of the things that really made the news was the ability for machine learning, these deep neural networks, to play games at a superhuman level. So chess is kind of an old one that, original chess algorithms were made procedural. So they just use rules. But there was one game, Go, that basically no procedural program could beat the best human players. And the AlphaGo project basically generated by a combination of different things. So, different parts of the game were different types of networks, so board positions and moves and so on. It was a combination of both supervised learning, so they basically watched the best human players play, but also just taught the thing the rules. And doing that, they got this program, AlphaGo Zero, and this is amazing. So it achieved, I love this, superhuman performance. So it basically went 100 to nothing against the previous champion. That's pretty amazing. And this is actually a very recent paper. This has even been expanded on. There's something called MuZero now. MuZero can not only play kind of all of these board games. Now, if you give it any video game, so any Atari game, you don't even have to teach it the rules. You just kind of allow it to play, and it knows that if it gets eaten by the ghost that it dies, then it can basically master any Atari game. So it's gotten to the point where it's almost a general purpose approach, this MuZero, to any game. So that's pretty cool. One that's kind of fun is generating art. People might have seen these things before. I just did this the other night. I found this photo of the bridge. I chose some art style, and if you can use this deepart.io, and it'll generate this picture in this style. So basically, it's taking two different types of neural networks and blending them together. It's learning the style from this thing. It's learning the structure of the image from this, and it's basically able to reproduce this image in some style. So that's that kind of ability to extrapolate, something that you might think about for physics. I know something, right? I know some simple model, and maybe I observe some complex behavior. So can I map that complex behavior onto a simple model? So these types of ideas have informed something in physics. And then this one's also kind of cool. These GANs, generative adversarial networks. A few people on the survey mentioned that they thought these were cool. So these are fake people generated by training on lots of pictures of real people. So you don't need models anymore for your clothing store. You can just use a GAN to generate pictures of people. But one thing that a few people also mentioned on the survey is that these are not perfect yet. So you can see right here, this hat, the logo on the hat does not look quite right. And so the latest papers, this is one from last year, are saying, okay, well, we've kind of solved this problem of how to make the fake people, but certain things like logos, and there are always these kind of droplet shapes that show up all the time in the backgrounds of these images, and gets rather surprisingly, it gets logos and words kind of screwed up. I mean, it's hard to ascribe meaning to the things that it's learning. So there are now techniques that are mostly related to regularization that are trying to fix this. But you can go to thispersondoesnotexist.com if you haven't done that before, and just keep refreshing it, and it'll just keep showing you pictures of people that don't exist, which is kind of weird. All right, so those are non-physics applications. So let's talk about where physics are. Again, when I say physics, I really mean a proxy for science, right? So where does physics or science fit in? There's a quote by Lu Wang, machine learning is about finding out regularities in data and making use of them for fun and profit. And that's actually something in physics that we know a lot about, and has really driven a lot of what we know about physics, right? So pattern recognition, understanding patterns in data, that's historically how we made breakthroughs in physics. So in particular, in the 16th century, Tycho Brahe looked at the position of planets. Johannes Kepler analyzed those and said, aha, ellipses, and discovered the empirical laws of planetary motion. And that really led to the field of classical mechanics, where we can predict where everything is at any time. So that was basically taking data, just numbers in a chart, and understanding the underlying physics. And now that led to that discovery, which that observation led to the discovery of classical mechanics, how things work. Jump a few centuries ahead, trying to understand the hydrogen absorption spectrum. So in other words, if you look at the absorption spectrum, there's these lines that are cut out of it. So that's pretty regular, right? Y 410, 434, 46, and 56 nanometers. Those regularities are basically what led to the discovery of quantum mechanics. The fact that there's a specific number where absorption happens is related to the fact that there's a specific solution to the Schrödinger equation for the hydrogen atom. So again, that noticing those patterns led to understanding new theories of the universe, or developing new theories of the universe. So there's a hope that for physics, maybe now we have so much data, maybe we can use or apply machine learning to do that first step, right? The first recognition that will then allow us to build the new theories. And an amazing project, again, this is a very recent paper. I encourage you to grab it. You can even play with the code. There's a project that's called AI Feynman. Max Tegmark at MIT did this. So people have probably, if you're a physicist, read or seen the Feynman lectures on physics. They're beautifully available online for free at this website down here, feynmanlectures.caltech.edu. And there's some large number of equations. All the beautiful things in physics are in this series of lectures, which are also beautifully written and tied to lots of physical insights. So what these two people did is they said, well, can we do what Tycho Brahe and Kepler, and then all the pioneers of quantum mechanics did? Can we do that systematically? So can we, based on everything we know now about the world, can we feed observations they chose 100 equations from the Feynman lectures on physics. Can we feed it in those equations? So what do I mean by that? So let's say, I'm going to choose a really simple example here. If we had F equals ma, okay, Newton's law. I basically give it, and there's two inputs, mass and acceleration there. I mean, this is an easy example, but I have essentially, think about it like some Excel spreadsheet where I put in the observations, all the different variables, and then I put the result. And I try to learn the functional form, the form of the equation, the actual fundamental law, just from the data. And so for 100 different things where data was available, using this AI Feynman approach, they were able to essentially rederive all of these 100 equations. And this is a very complicated thing of what they're doing, but this is basically what it is. So you have some X, X column, Y column, some F of X and Y. And we know how to, these are observations. And what I want is the equation. And so for this particular case, it's Planck's law of black body radiation. So the radiation is proportional to we've got Boltzmann's constant down here and the frequency to the third power and so on. And so essentially what this complicated neural network is doing is applying all of the physics knowledge that we have. What are the dimensions? How can we, are there brute force pieces that we can do basically to spit out this equation? I think it's just totally amazing that just from the data, you can do essentially symbolic regression, which means trying all possible combinations of formulas with physics knowledge, right? I mean, this would not be possible without some domain knowledge, because think about all the different types of functions that there are in the world. You can't just do a brute force search through every single thing. Is it an 11th order polynomial combined with a cosine divided by e to the x squared? You really have to know something about physics to be able to get this right. And so you can actually train this particular neural network to really learn about physics. And so these are things we know. So now can we apply this to data streams where we don't know the answer? So I like to say that, we kind of physics right now and science in general operates at the complexity frontier. That basically means we have so much data, we don't even know what to do with it, right? An example in physics is the size of the Hilbert space, the exponentially large Hilbert space. This is an actual picture of some trapped ions. So each one of these is like a rubidium atom. And so let's say I have, in this case, I think it's 8 atoms on 8 sites. Well, because these can all multiply occupy each other's sites, they're bosons, then the number of configurations that this system can take on is exponentially large. So if I actually want to know what is the quantum state, so let's say I can measure the density, right? So I do a measurement that collapses the wave function, and here's the location of these particular atoms. But then I ask, well, what was the quantum state there underlying that picture that I took? Well, if I actually look at how many possibilities there are of the system, this would be something like the density matrix. The density matrix is just the outer product of the wave function for people that have taken quantum mechanics, but that's not important. It's basically just a representation of which one of those gigantic, exponentially large number of configurations, was this. And there's just no way to systematically do experiments. So this is an experiment done on this very small system. You can see how many actual measurements. So each of these spikes corresponds to a single measurement. Here they found them to be 0, and there's some places where they found density in this density matrix. So you have to do like 10,000 experiments just to produce one of these pictures. And that obviously doesn't scale. That's 10 atoms. What if we want to do 12 atoms? Well, then you need like 100,000 experiments. That's just not going to happen. So, we need things like these deep neural networks potentially to help us with this problem. This is also true in things like materials design, things like in quantum computing. How do you generate the best set of gates to entangle or disentangle to encode a particular state? So the problem here is that the space of possibilities is so large that we basically don't know how to even deal with the problem. And the hope is that maybe neural networks can help us in some of those ways. And just as a couple of pictures where that approach was used. People might have seen this before. This is Sycamore, one of Google AI's quantum processors. So that they basically had to understand how to do all the interconnections in here, and they did that with a neural graph. Things like particle jets. We'll talk more about that in a moment in some applications. This is just a bigger picture of atoms, ions on traps. There's no way that you could ever reconstruct the quantum state from this thing. It's just too big, but you might be able to do it with neural networks. And for us, I think there's even more pragmatic reasons in physics why this would be a useful thing to do. So there's an article from a couple of years ago talking about the size of salaries for people going into this field. The idea is that there's a lot of demand, and it takes a long time to get a PhD in computer science. But basically, anything we know about these networks could be potentially useful going forward from a career standpoint. I like this one. So Yann LeCun is another big guy in the world of machine learning. And someone asked him a couple of years ago. Someone in computer science asked him, "What's your advice for an undergraduate student who aspires to be a research scientist in deep learning or other related field?" And he says, "Take all the math and physics classes you can possibly take." So, basically, if you had to choose between iOS programming and quantum mechanics, take quantum mechanics. That makes me feel good as a physicist. Quantum mechanics is useful in machine learning. And so this class tries to, hybridize some of those ideas a little bit. Okay, so physics applications. Again, I'm just going to tell you about some of my favorites. There's literally thousands by now, and these will be biased towards the literature that I know, which is more on the condensed matter side of things. Here are just, again, some that I grabbed. One thing that's been quite hot lately is, and again, you'll notice these are all within the last couple of years, is learning the energy potential. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's say I have some atomic species, and they could be quite complicated. We have electrons whizzing around in here, but these atoms are themselves neutral. So the interactions are quite weak. They're not electrostatic. Normally what we do is we just parameterize the interactions between the individual atoms in these molecules and then sum them up, use essentially that superposition works. Right? But that could be quite time consuming, and it's not guaranteed to necessarily work. So one of the ideas, maybe we can actually learn start with really small molecules that we can solve exactly. So, in this very small case, maybe we can do very good density functional theory type approaches to really learn what the interaction looks like to high precision. And then, so that's this correlation down here. We can correlate the exact to the predicted value. They fall in this line. And then maybe we can then extrapolate those to much larger, more complicated systems where we certainly don't know how to solve them exactly. So there's been quite a lot of progress there that maybe these kind of machine learned potentials actually perform better than the simple two-body potentials that we use in physics and in chemistry and in biology as well. One that we'll actually do in this class is phase discrimination. So we'll learn exactly how this works. We'll write code that reproduces these two plots, hopefully, if everything goes well. Phase discrimination means I have a phase of matter. So a phase of matter could be water as opposed to ice. But in this case, it's a disordered magnet versus an ordered magnet, let's say. So I imagine, so in this particular picture right here, we'll learn a lot more about this. We'll use this as one of our standard examples. Dark means, let's say a 1 and light means a 0 or vice versa. And so the pattern of these 1s and 0s corresponds to some physical configuration of a system, magnetism or ferromagnet or disordered, not magnetic at all. So we can do the same thing we did with the cat. So we say, well, this is the ordered state, the ferromagnet is a cat, and the disordered state is not a cat. We try to train a feed-forward neural network just using supervised learning where we've labeled the configurations ferromagnetic and disordered or not magnetic. So we'll learn more about this Hamiltonian going forward. This is just the simplest Hamiltonian you can write down. It's called the Ising model for a magnet. There's just some zeros and ones, and they're coupled with some interactions. And then we train it on this, and this is an early and very famous paper in the field, using this supervised learning, that if you train it on a system where we know where the transition happens between the magnet and the disordered state, and then you show the same network pictures of a system where we don't know exactly. Let's say we change the lattice structure or we change some of the interactions. The network can actually predict where that transition occurs, which temperature it happens at. So that's pretty cool. There's also unsupervised approaches. So we'll learn about unsupervised learning approaches as well, where we don't do labels to the data. We just try to find some patterns that we can't see by just looking at pictures. So essentially, this is just something like trying to figure out, I show it pictures at different temperatures for some different values. So this on the left-hand side here is this color bar is temperature. These are the ordered states. These are the disordered states. And just showing it these pictures, it's actually able to cluster them into different pieces. So, the network here, this unsupervised case, doesn't know anything about the temperature, but it can actually separate in some way the different configurations. It knows that these are all alike in some way, and these ones at the edges are all alike in some way. So we'll try to do that type of thing as well going forward. So this is a pretty exciting and promising area of research. And again, if you have questions about these, I'm just kind of giving you the briefest overview of just where we might be able to go. But if you want to know more, please ask me a question and I can tell you more. Okay. Another area where it's been very useful is in so-called variational ansatz. So all that is ansatz here is just a fancy name for guess, right? So people that have done, maybe I'll get a show of hands. How many people have taken a quantum mechanics class before? Okay, so approximately a third. So if you've taken a quantum mechanics class, you might have seen the variational theorem before. And basically the idea is just, even if I don't know what the wave function is, I can get a pretty good idea of the energy of a state by guessing a wave function and then optimizing it in some way. So there's some type of variational parameter. So people might have seen that for like the harmonic oscillator or something like that. So one of the ways that people have decided to use a certain type of neural network, a really simple one that actually doesn't have an output layer. So here's a case where I have a so-called visible layer and just a hidden layer, is to use the expressivity, which is basically just the structure of this network, as a wave function, as a trial wave function. And then in the same way that in a variational calculation where we're trying to minimize the energy, we do the same thing here. And it turns out that this works better for many quantum systems than what people used to use, something called the Jastrow wave function. This is just a modification of that Ising Hamiltonian where I add a magnetic field in a certain direction. This is the error in the energy. So in some case where they train this and they know the exact energy, based on how many of these hidden layers there were, from let's say 1 up to 4, what they're plotting is that the error in the machine learning approach, and you can get errors as low as like 10 to the minus 8. So this works really, really well. I mean, talk about a name for a paper. I aspired to having a name for a paper like this one day, solving the quantum many-body problem with artificial neural networks. Like, it's solved. We all of us were out of a job now. There's no more quantum many-body problem. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, that's not the case. There is still a quantum many-body problem. But they can, one of the cool things that they can do here is after training this network, basically minimizing the energy, they can look inside and try to see if they can learn something from the actual structure of the weights and the biases in this network. So not only is it a mean to an end in terms of getting a good energy for the ground state, something that we always are doing in physics. Are those questions from Shiva and Amit, or are those still raised hands from, have you taken a quantum class?
No, those are, I think, just raised hands. You have to unclick it.
Okay. Okay, so we don't have that much time left, so we can go some of these quicker. In the same kind of vein, again, this is a pretty extreme title, Deep Neural Network Solution of the Electronic Schrodinger Equation. But we know that basically we can solve the Schrodinger equation for the hydrogen atom exactly. But beyond that, we can. And the problem is because of, one way to cast it is how many determinants you need to do to express the electronic configurations in the problem. And you can see that this grows to huge amounts of determinants, 10 to the 10. That's just too big for anything to solve. And so an approximate solution using some type of neural network was used, and they could go up to pretty large systems with up to 30 electrons. So that's, again, a pretty recent paper, but a pretty exciting possibility. And, as I said, if these don't even seem like interesting problems to you in physics, I'm just showing these as some of the latest research in this field. We're going to come back. We're going to start right from the beginning and build up our intuition about some systems. So don't get scared away if some of these things don't look like things that you know about. I mean, I don't even know what some of the stuff is going on in here is. I had to pick an example from UT. So Steve Johnston in the physics department has a really nice paper on the Hubbard-Holstein model where they figured out how to speed up. One of the big bottlenecks is how you can make updates in certain types of Monte Carlo calculations. And so they figured out how to do this by combining some convolutional neural network with a fully connected deep neural network. And they were able to get to some of the largest system sizes, in this case, 16 by 16. So this is a model of electrons coupled to phonons on a lattice. So this is just one example. There's been many other places where it's been used to accelerate conventional numerical techniques. So this is a way of kind of like re-envisioning our old algorithms, and by old here I mean 20 years old, with some of these advances. And we'll learn about some of the ways we can do that. an area where I've worked a little bit is on analytic continuation. So there's a problem that's pretty generic, but especially generic for physicists, is that this looks like a really easy relation. Basically, I want this thing, the spectral function, something like A of omega, but the only thing that I know how to compute is this G of tau. So I know the left, but I don't know the right. So this shows up in all types of different ways in physics, in numerical simulations related to experiments where, let's say neutron scattering that happens at Oak Ridge Lab. So I'd like to be able to extract this A knowing G. So you'd say, well, just invert this. This is just an integral equation. Just invert it. It turns out that that's an ill-posed problem. You can't actually invert it. There are many, many different G's that basically lead to the same A's. Or small changes in G could produce very large changes in A. So even if I know G, it's unclear how to get A. And so people have, this kind of state of the art for this is called the maximum entropy method. But over the last couple of years, people have figured out how to do some machine learning approaches. So in this case, it's not important, but the previous state of the art coming from Maxent is this blue dashed curve. The ground truth here is the black line, and then the red plus error bars is the machine learned one. So that's a pretty, that's a heck of a lot better at getting the shape of this spectra than the other one. Okay, one final one, and this is just related to this quantum state tomography I was telling you about. You basically take a snapshot of the locations of atoms. So this is like Misha Lukin and others. So they have these cold atom systems. They know how to take pictures of the locations of the atom. What they want to know is what's the quantum state underneath, and they can use a neural network to do that. And I included a name here. This is Giacomo Torlai in terms of connecting back to my highly sought after. So Giacomo now works for AWS Quantum. I was chatting with him the other day, and he basically is taking all the things that he did around this and other things and applying it to Amazon's attempt to build a quantum computer, and doing very, very well. All right, so those are some condensed matter quantum physics applications. Just a few other, because we're not all condensed matter physicists here. So actually, in terms of high energy physics and cosmology, they beat condensed matter physicists to this game. They've been using convolutional neural networks for a long time, and one place is anything where there's an image that needs to be analyzed, like a particle jet, let's say, and you're interested in analyzing the outcomes. In this case, it's some boosted W bosons. They take a picture, they put it through some convolutional neural networks, and they can try to figure out what are the outcomes of this. So this is a nice paper that's actually even readable. Well, I found it readable, even though I don't know a lot about the underlying physics in this case. I like the title of this one too, Jet Images Deep Learning Edition. So I tried to choose papers that were cool, but also had cool names. And then as a final one, you can actually essentially predict cosmological constants by trying to understand potentially the dark matter distribution of the universe. And so these are 3D convolutional neural networks, which makes things a little bit more tricky, but mostly it's the same thing. And I guess I haven't even told you what convolutional neural networks are, other than saying that word a bunch of times. We'll learn all about them. Essentially, if you have image data where there's local structural information, then the thing to often do is to break the image up into small pieces and apply some local transformations to those small pieces, and then build the image back up, with the idea being that that maybe that you want to learn something locally before you learn something globally about an image. And that will come in terms of when we look at handwriting digit recognition. Convolutional neural networks are really the way to do that. All right, so any questions about those before I just talk a little bit more about the structure of the course, and then we'll finish off? Again, I'm just throwing information at you. We'll start learning some stuff on next week.
Are you gonna post all these slides too in our file section on Canvas?
Yes, I will. I'll put everything on. So normally what I do is I'll put them on as soon as the lecture is done or shortly thereafter. And if I ever forget to do that, just ping me and I'll put them up. And I tend to, so I did PowerPoint, in this case, Keynote for today, but my plan, because I never really like just watching Keynote presentations all the time, is I'll try to do, real-time derivations of everything where possible. I think it's way easier for us to move at a pace where everyone can understand and we can go over individual details. So if all goes well, this will be the last PowerPoint, but I can't draw this dark matter distribution by hand.
I understand.
Okay, so just maybe a little bit about the structure of the course. So these were the pre-course survey results. So the split is 30-70 between undergraduates and graduate students. People had various levels of proficiency with Python. I'm not assuming that you know how to program well in Python. We will learn the pieces that we need to learn. I didn't want to have a programming prerequisite, but at least it looks like, for the majority of people know how to do something. If you're feeling stressed about this piece, if you're if you claim yourself in the beginner class here, then, let's just talk. It's easy to get you up to speed, and we'll do lots of hands-on stuff. This is when I asked, you're familiar with machine learning before. 3 respondents said they'd used it in the research, so maybe I'll just call them out here. So that was David and Eli and Noah said that. I wonder if you guys want to take 30 seconds and tell us what specifically you've used it for.
I can go ahead and start. So we're doing convolutional neural networks for facial recognition for DHS. But we're looking at a potential quantum computer outlet for that.
Sounds pretty exciting.
You go ahead, Evan.
Okay, so I worked for Nadia Fomin, and there I used a little bit of clustering just for digital signal processing. And then when I did an internship at Berkeley Lab, and as part of that, I worked on some experimental automation stuff with Gaussian processes. So I didn't actually use neural networks for actually any of that, I think, but I guess it's still in the family. So.
Yeah. Ready, Eli?
Yeah, I actually also work for Dr. Fomin, so I continued some of his clustering thing and then did some support vector machines, but that's about it.
Cool. Well, when we get to clustering, you guys can tell us more about everything that you did and how it relates to that particular research. All right, was there anyone else have a in research use? Cool. So hopefully the people that have done that much won't find the first part of the class too slow for them. If you're finding it slow, then feel free not to attend, and you can just watch the videos on 2 times speed afterwards to see if there's anything that you missed. But I really like this mixture of where people are right now. This is kind of exactly what I was hoping for. So there's a lot, some maybe basic knowledge, but I'm assuming right here. I'm assuming none, and we're gonna build these things from scratch. We're gonna write our own backpropagation code, and then only once we kind of understand how things work are we gonna move on from there to using TensorFlow. So I want everyone to come out of this class feeling like they could use this in their research, and maybe they'll even be able to show that in the final project. All right, so this was just the outline. You can read the syllabus. I encourage you to do it. I kind of just said this. We're going to start with the basics. We'll do supervised learning, feed forward, convolutional neural networks. Then we'll talk about unsupervised learning, clustering, data visualization, and how to use spaces. Generative models are kind of the hottest thing in physics right now. Autoencoders, RBMs. This is ways that I can actually generate a probability distribution and extract samples from it. One of the pictures on the poster was an RBM for a random walk. Recurrent neural networks are time series, so we'll see if we can get to that. Reinforcement learning is fun. It's used in various types of physics. Actually, one of the coolest utilizations of reinforcement learning recently is how to build the best set of circuits for a quantum algorithm to build a quantum circuit. If you just want to, let's say, propagate some fidelity, then you can just use that fidelity as the reward that you get. And you can get weird circuit diagrams that like humans would never think of that perform better, which is kind of impressive just by doing this. And then we'll see how much time we have at the end for advanced topics. Maybe some of these could be in the project. All right, these were the learning outcomes. I kind of already talked about that. What we're going to do, we're going to have every week, we'll try to have one theory lecture and we'll have one coding lecture. There's going to be on the order of 4 or 5 assignments. Let's see. You'll have to do some stuff out of class, but hopefully it'll be fun. And there are other classes that you absolutely should take here. Some people said that they've already taken machine learning classes. Maybe they took one of these. These are 2 classes offered at UT. These go way more in depth and more broadly on some of the theory behind and different types of machine learning approaches. So I strongly encourage you to take these by people that are basically global experts in this field. If you have time in your time to take one of these classes, you definitely should. And just to kind of finish, all this is listed on Canvas. This is where we'll start on next Tuesday, talking about course technologies, and we'll start actually playing around with some of this stuff. We're going to start learning some Python as it's applicable here. But so Canvas is basically where I expect you to go for all announcements. I'll put the quizzes, assignments, everything's going to be done through that. We'll use Python 3, and in particular, we're going to use Jupyter Notebooks, and we'll talk more about that. We'll use some basic libraries, just NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, maybe. This is the new and exciting thing. So we're going to use Open On Demand, which is a web-based portal to our supercomputer here on campus to basically do live coding in class all together on our own notebook. So we're actually doing stuff. It's going to be very active, not just sitting back on Zoom and listening to me prattle on for a long time. We have an academic project set up for this class. So we have a particular reservation on the supercomputer for us, which is pretty nice. So I will post an assignment 1, which is really going to be get an account on the supercomputer so that we can use it in class on Tuesday. So I will post this on Canvas probably tomorrow. It should take you exactly 5 minutes to do potentially. And there's some links here, which are also on Canvas of what you need to do, and I'll include those because I'd like hopefully everyone to be on the same page. In terms of machine learning software, we'll use maybe some scikit-learn and then TensorFlow via the Keras interface, which is going to allow us to set things up really easily. And one thing I only learned about this week is that UTK actually has an enterprise GitHub instance. That's github.utk.edu. We pay for that. So all of you have access to an enterprise GitHub account. And that's what I'm going to use for code distribution. So basically at the start of a lecture, we can all do a Git clone and then pull today's notebook from that. There's still a few hiccups that I'm working out. Hopefully they'll all be fixed by class on Tuesday when we can actually use that. But that'll be really nice because there won't be any like, who has the latest version of this and did you get this off Canvas? Just in real time, we can execute a cell from the notebook that is a Git pull, and we'll all have today's latest code to work on. So hopefully that's going to be fun. But just, you need to be on campus or have the VPN to use this. But if you want this weekend, try it out. GitHub.utk.edu. It's completely not advertised. If you Google GitHub UTK, you will not find information about this. I don't know if they're hiding it for some reason, but we got ourselves an account for this. So everyone should be able to do it. As I said, you have to be on the VPN or on campus to be able to see that. And the nice thing is, although you can link it to your own GitHub account if you have one, it's just using your UTK SSO. So your regular single sign-on gives you an account on here. And if you've never used GitHub before, well, maybe I should ask quickly, although I'm 40 seconds over. Well, we'll come back to it. If you've never used GitHub before, we will learn how to do that too. So we're going to learn lots of fun stuff. And I will see you on Tuesday. I have office hours on Friday. There's a link on a Zoom link on Canvas. So if you want to drop in and talk to me, please do so on Friday afternoon. And I'm happy to stick around if anyone has extra questions.
Thank you very much.
I actually did have a question about the assignments.
Yeah.
So at least in the class, we're going to be using Jupyter Notebooks. This is just a personal preference about how I use Python. I prefer to just write the script separate from Jupyter.
That's fine. You want to write a Python script as long as it.
Yeah, I like it because it's a little bit easier to debug and run everything all at once.
Sure. I mean, as long as it produces whatever if at the end of the day, as long as it's spitting up some image graph that I can see or whatever you're doing, that's totally fine.
Yeah. I have no problem with that. I've been using Python for several years now. So,
And again, I'm not wedded to people having to use Python either. If you want to use Julia, you can also spin and we can, use Julia in class, but I will personally, the stuff that I'll push out will be in Python. Otherwise I just have to manage too many different things.
that's understandable. All right. Well, see you Tuesday.
Thank you, Professor. So that's really cool. So you mentioned Julia as like an option to do things. I mean, I know I'm just a spectator, but still, I've been really interested in trying to just learn Julia. Python was my first kind of like science language that I had learned way back in undergrad. But so all of this you think can be done relatively easier?
So once we get to like the TensorFlow piece, I mean, there's no direct TensorFlow port to Julia right now, but there are, anything that we're doing, the kind of idea of Keras, essentially Keras is like, how do I build a network just as a graph and then run operations on that graph? There are machine learning packages in Julia that people are all excited about right now as well. And I would say, in my research group, Emmanuel has done a little bit of coding in Julia before. In my research group, we're kind of split. So we use C++ for all production stuff. And then otherwise we use Python or Julia. Although some people, one of my students in particular, is now doing everything in Julia and claims that it can be as fast or faster as C++.
That's what I keep hearing. And I'm so interested. I mean, my project that I just did was all in MATLAB, and I don't want to use MATLAB if I don't have to. And so I was thinking Julia might be a good replacement to like move my work towards that. And so even you mentioned analytic continuation. Sorry. I was like, oh man, if I could do a machine learning for analytic continuation for these like spectral functions, that'd be so cool. But I have no idea.
Yeah, and people are basically doing that, not in Julia, but I mean, you definitely could. I think the cool thing about Julia is that the community has lots of physicists in it. And so the types of problems that they're solving are similar to ones that we all face. You can take a very simple Julia, you can write a really simple Julia code. To make it fast, you have to make it a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
And then if you're going back and forth between Python and Julia, you have to worry about one index versus zero index. But I guess if you're doing MATLAB to Python, you're dealing with that problem anyway.
Yeah.
I prefer zero index because I think about an array as a pointer. And then if I don't want to add one, I want to add zero to get the first element.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
I understand people feel differently. All right, awesome. Well, if there's any other questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, come to the office hours on Friday, or we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you.
All right.